I'm Shashank. I work as Principal Exploratory Tester with Moolya. Today in this webinar, we will be talking about testing e-commerce application. Uh, before coming to the introduction part of it, let's understand what an e-commerce application is. So, e-commerce is an electronic form of commerce, buying or selling products or services online, be it selling physical products like electronics, clothes, or the digital products like bill payments, recharge, insurance, or the services. So here, when we talk about e-commerce, as I said, selling products or services online is the simplest definition of e-commerce application is. Here we will be discussing about three things, which is like e-commerce in India. The second is e-commerce testing, which we will be talking about in detail, and the current market players or the big guns in the market. So when we talk about e-commerce in India, it's believed that India Plaza was the first company, and they started way back in 1999. Um, but though Indian e-commerce space actually saw the real boom, a lot of people exploring, a lot of people working and ordering things way back in 2006 and 7. And we see, in the history that there are a lot of startups which came into that zone of 2005, 7, 8, 10, and we see there are today we have a huge number of e-commerce companies covering a very large variety of domains. We have examples of some companies like Flipkart, Amazon, InMobi, Paytm, Make My Trip, Ola, only to name a few of them. And one of the things which is this, these all are so very part of our daily life. And so this is a basic introduction about e-commerce, the history, and the market players and everything. Now moving on to the e-commerce testing. So moving on to the topic of this webinar, testing e-commerce application. With ever improving and enhancing technologies, increasing user base, and the new domains getting added to the e-commerce, system or e-commerce way of, business, testing of these applications should also be enhanced, right? Now, the big point is, how do we do that? The one of the answers to that particular question is, we understand the e-commerce system with, you know, the functionalities, the way it interacts, right? So here is a very basic, I should say, e-commerce system, overview, where we have customer platform. It contains both web and app, and web contains mobile website or desktop website, applications, be it Android application, iOS application, and once upon a time a Windows application as well. There is this data aggregation layer which collects or provides data to this customer platform and interacts with backend services. Backend services in general are, a cluster of services which range from services to microservices and a lot of things. I'll try to explain this particular thing with the help of an example. Imagine a user wants to purchase a mobile phone, right? So what does he or she does? So they go onto a application, any e-commerce application, they search for a product, they check the specifications, they check the model, they check the offers, they add the item to the cart, and then they move forward, right? They place an order. What happens in that case? This becomes the user's experience of an e-commerce system. Is what happens on the other side of the system is the story of backend services. So for user, all these things are seamlessly working. He or she checks out products from catalog service, he makes a payment system kicks in. So for system, there are a lot of services which are involved in this. So if a user checks out a product and he enters a pin code, right? Based on the pin code, the availability and serviceability of this particular product is determined, right? So based on that, user would be redirected to payments maybe, or if the item is not serviceable, it would send an appropriate message to the user screen, right? Saying, okay, the item is not serviceable to this pin code, or we do not deliver to this pin code, change the pin code, right? And if these serviceability and availability checks are completed, we move on to payments. So what happens is payment system gives us all the available payment mode, be it cash on delivery, be it EMIs, or credit card, debit card, or other wallets as well. So once all of this is done, we move on to the bank page, right? And if the payment is successful, that's where the order management system, which is OMS, kicks in. So OMS actually talks to multiple services or microservices here. OMS might talk about serviceability for the delivery of the item, for the warehouse, for the inventory, post order systems where they create an order ID against the order. They mention all the information when the item will be delivered, what was the payment mode, what was the price of the item, what all services did you avail with this. So all these services interact with each other, and microservices interact with each other, which forms the backend. And then this is passed on to data aggregator layer or data providing layer, which in turn return back this response to customer platform. So this is a basic overview of e-commerce system is. So talking about customer platform in here, so in a nutshell, the way customer interacts or the user interacts with the system, right? What all he sees, what all he experiences on an app or a desktop is a customer platform. So user interaction, his experience based on the interaction is something which falls under customer, because he does not directly deals with backend systems through API or anything, right? So page user sees on any website or mobile application, right? And so under customer platform, there are a lot of things which fall under. The basics are platforms, which is Windows, iOS, mobile website, desktop website, and Windows app, right? And then there are a lot of features. Every of the e-commerce company do provide product finder, wish list, cart and payments, return and offers. There is a separate section for payments almost in every of the e-commerce company is. So now talking about how do you divide this customer platform into multiple parts. So then there is this user path, and then on the backend side you get to have order path as well. So for example, user comes to a website, he might find a product, right? All these things, which interaction, which actions user does, is user path. So all these things, maybe navigating to from one page to another, or opening different product details page, checking out specifications, might be closing the window, or killing the app. All these things come under user path. Now coming to the order path, everything you do on the after successfully placing an order, maybe return replacement or change the delivery date. A lot of companies do give us the option of having a convenient delivery date for the large items, right? So all those things are order path for us. So now coming on to the very next and important, I should say, section of this particular webinar is test approach. So when we talk about test approach, it in general sense, it gives us a overview that how would I approach in case I get to work on an e-commerce application is. And this generally happens with all the other applications too. So test approach actually depends on a lot of things. For example, I'll give you an example. What happens if you get to work on a feature which is already live, but then there is a minor issue, right? We do face these issues sometime or the other. What happens if your stakeholders comes to you and says, Shashank, why don't you test this part and we want to release it by today evening? So the factors which decide your approach are timelines, right? The coverage, the impact of that particular code change is, what bug fix is it going, and there are few other things which you want to incorporate when you start testing that particular thing, right? Sure. So when we talk about different test approaches, it's very contextual. Since our systems are so very dynamic, they change with ever changing requirements. They're not very legacy products, right? Where things have been developed once and they are just being maintained. E-commerce systems are very dynamic. They change it over time. A lot of times they change the current system, right? With new technology, maybe new framework, maybe new language, and all the improvements to make life of user pretty smooth. The transition of user from coming to the application, purchasing items, and all these experience, they want to make it very smooth. So when we talk about test approaches, we should, and one more thing I wanted to call out actually is, the basic question becomes, how should we proceed to test such an application, right? When we have it so dynamic, so we should have a holistic approach to all of this, considering following factors while defining a test approach. We should actually should ask a lot of questions, sometimes to us and sometimes to our stakeholders, right? What test approach would fit this best? We should look into multiple approaches, look into factors which would help us achieve the results, right? Since we have a delivery to do at the end of the day for this particular example, we should have a approach where we are in a good shape to maybe deliver this by the end of the day. For example, what happens in case you're working on a brand new feature of a company where you get to work on a domain you are not so very familiar with, right? We with the e-commerce system, everyone wants to be the only source of all these services people want to provide, right? We have seen it, right? Take example of Make My Trip. So they were into flight business, right? And they move into holiday packages, bus, trains, and everywhere, right? You take example of few more other e-commerce companies which, other than selling electronics, goods, clothes, moved into selling insurance and maybe flights and other things, right? So what happens in that particular scenario with us, right? So consider no prior experience working on the domain, we can start by exploring the product. So that is one of the approach. We actually can explore this product, we get to know, and that is actually called as exploratory testing a lot of times, right? We can read the documentation, we can ask the questions to stakeholders. And when I say this thing, ask question to stakeholders, it becomes one of the very prime point, because we get to know a lot about the product once we start asking questions and people start answering these questions. Because based on the questions, you will again get to know what all new things they are doing with this particular product is. And this helps us greatly in understanding of the system is, right? The objective why we are launching a new product. And anything other than being money is one of the prime factors why people put in so much of efforts in launching new product. We should also look into timelines. Since I have mentioned timeline, is that because timeline, we might have an approach which takes a month or maybe 18 working days to complete, but then the stakeholders with the feature does not have that much of timeline. What do? We cramp, or we cheat. Either we can cramp, which would not give us the best quality of the product, or we can change our approach towards it, right? For example, you get to work on a product which is very new, right? But then the point is, you have to decide what all things you need to cover, right? For example, you're working on an Android app and you have a new feature called as wish list, right? What do you do in that particular case? You come up with the ideas, test ideas to build around that particular feature. You talk to your stakeholders, maybe getting the requirements and getting information like which version of Android OS does it support, which version it does not. Because since we are moving incrementally year after year on the new version, there are a lot of companies who does not support a certain version, or this versions below than that, right? So we need to come up with our test ideas and test approaches based on the data we have. And again, the coverage becomes important. The reason I say this is, you get to work on Android 6, Android 7, Android 8, and Android 9, right? But then the feature you are testing supports all of these versions with the limited timelines. How do you approach that? How do you test that? That becomes your approach. Now, one more thing which is so very important with e-commerce is, it's so customer interactive that making a thing which is something which does not help customer, right? Talking about all the aspects of it, coverage is one of the prime factors, right? And user experience too. User experience. Okay, how about this? You miss out on a customer because the customer was not able to find the product he or she was looking for, right? That would be a bad impression of the application is to the customer, right? Because you might not see that customer coming back to your application ever again, right? So it's very important for the user to interact and the developer and the team of that application to make it so very easily available, smoothly conducting app which we want to deliver. As I told you, right? Example of sudden release. Okay, let's have a example of regression, right? So we all have this agile methodologies where team works for 2 weeks, sprints, and you get to follow that what is getting developed in this sprint, what will be the testing needs to be done on what all things, right? So you need to plan your testing. You have to take your approach based on that particular thing, because since you have to do a regression, you might start with focusing the new changes which are coming in, the code or the areas which are getting impacted, and the overall regression checking almost all part of the application, where user interaction happens, and then there are few edge cases what we come up, all these things needs to be tested. When I say almost all, because I personally believe checking everything is not possible, and there are a lot of times there is no need for it, right? Guys, can you follow me? Like, am I audible, and are things fine?
Yes, Shashank, you're
Yeah,
audible.
cool, great. Like, are you able to follow me?
Yes,
Yes,
Shashank.
Awesome. So now, since we talk about approach, and we talk about heuristics, we talk about oracles, because all these play an important part. Just because we get to work on something, we don't start being testers. We just don't start, though that is one more approach. In case you don't have any documentation, any design or anything, you just jump onto testing. That is one approach, which is not bad, but then it's so very contextual. It depends on the requirement, basically. So now let's talk about testing techniques. We in the testing community talk about testing and testing techniques, what should be done, when should be done, why it should be done, and a lot of other factors, right? So you see, right, we do functional testing. A lot of us does, and automation testing. I'm not so very sure if I'll cover automation in this part, since keeping focused to very straightforward to one of the things, right? So when we talk about functional testing, we just don't check if the UI is looking great, it's looking pretty, right? We test for functionality. We check for functions. A lot of times we don't have access to code, but then we use our experience, heuristics to check out. Okay, for example, there is a button, right? What happens if I click on that button? So my basic instincts would tell me, right, if I click on this button, it should respond, maybe go to a new page, give me an error message, or give me a toast message or a pop-up, right? All these things. So how does that button comes at that place? That's the user has written a function. If you land on this particular page, you're supposed to see a button. You need to check what this functionality does. If this is capable of working, you get to experience that, whether it will work, whether it will respond or not. Another is user testing. So what happens? Okay, I'll give you an example. In an e-commerce company, we all know there is a customer support department, right? Okay, now this happens. As a customer support executive, you get to interact with customers, right? And in that domain, there are multiple subcategory, I would say. So some people are chat experts, some people are call expert, and then there are people who actually reply back on emails. So when you develop a system for these people, you have to keep yourself, developer would develop the system, but when you're testing it, you would keep yourself in multiple roles. What happens when a user is interacting with them, or what happens when a user is on chat and the customer executive support executive is on chat? The system would be very different for him, right? So the same happens with the email expert or the call expert. The UI, because the problem the customer would raise would be very limited, right? He would have a problem with his order, with his payment, with his offers, or the delivery of the item. And there are a few things like very, I should say, high level, or he or she might want to get some information, right? Maybe. So a lot of time this happen, we Indians love to experience and buy items in sale, right? So all these e-commerce company come up with big ads, sales starting from this time, that time, we are doing this, the lowest price, and all those things. So when you say it's a lowest price, it's a claim. how do you do that? How do you check it out whether the claim is correct or not? One of the approaches, you go back, right, to your system. You check out your competitors whether they are selling the same product or not. In case they are, you check out their prices, right? One more thing, you can search. You can search on the internet what all websites sell this item. Or there are a lot of times where offline stores, they mention their price list on their website, or they don't deliver, like they don't take orders through website, but then they give information about the product, the specification, and the price. So that's where your claim testing comes in picture, where you're actually testing what claim the company is making, whether it's correct, or they are making people believe something which is not correct, and those sort of things. Another testing technique is risk testing. So we have seen a lot of times, right? People tend to hack your systems, right? People, a lot of people have recreated the website into a fake website, where they are fraudsters. They ask you to pay some money, and they'll provide you offer, and they might give you better discounts and sort of things, right? A lot of time this happens. Hacker tries to insert a cross-site scripting, where you are doing something on this particular site, but the data is reflecting somewhere else, technically meaning they are stealing your data, right? So what you do, either you figure out that this particular code written by the developer is very easy for the hackers to hack into, or it's vulnerable to let people do fraud activities. How do you test that? Either to test it, you can do that, or you can actually get an expert can tell you, or the developer or the stakeholder, that what you need to be doing to avoid all these vulnerabilities. We, like, almost all the e-commerce companies have this little testing department, which is called a security testing, right? So in case we, as maybe manual tester or automation tester, who have understanding of code, or if we know how to debug, or go line by line to the code and understand, it becomes so pretty easy. Because I'll tell you this thing, if you have understanding of code, it's not necessary, but it's good to have thing that you get your testing pretty much sorted based on the code here your developer has written, right? So that's where understanding and applying these testing techniques comes in picture. Now talking about flow testing and scenario testing, since I give you my first example, right? You remember when the user wanted to buy a mobile phone. So all the actions, or all the interactions user is having with the app, moving from one page to another or coming back, that is a flow. User coming in, selecting a product, adding it to cart, paying, and the order is successful. That is the happiest of the flow, where nothing broke, everything was seamless. Those sort of things are considered as flow testing. Now there comes another thing, which is scenario testing. When I talk about scenarios, right, coming up with scenarios, right? Maybe positive scenarios, negative scenarios. And a lot of times testers do hear this, right? This is a weird case, right? Technically, it's not a weird case. It's something, as a tester, we love to do. We love to sometimes break the system to know whether the system is able to handle certain things or not, right? We tend to do, things at a regular interval. Maybe, you load a page, you kill it, right? Okay, I'll give you an example how a scenario works, right? Scenario testing is something, okay, you are on a website, you add some items to your cart, and then you don't log in, you are not a logged in user, you drop that session. Maybe you try it in incognito mode, where they don't record your history and sort of things, and you drop out of that session. What happens when a user comes back in session, in the very same session, logs in? Does all your items which are in your cart do reflect in your cart or not? So that becomes one of your scenarios. So these texting techniques do help us identify, explore, and test our application better, right? So since I have given you a image of money back, 100% money back guarantee, that is something which would fall under claim testing. Okay, now moving on to the other part, which is coverage and tools. We when we talk about approach, we did talk about something called as coverage. Now discussing coverage in detail is one of the important aspect of testing application is.
Shashank,
Yeah.
so there are few questions posted by other folks.
Sure, Shri, we have a dedicated session for Q&A.
Okay, sure.
I'll be more than happy to respond back to all the questions in that particular session. So yeah, moving to test coverage, it can be divided into what, like platform coverage, test coverage, browsers, in case you are working on, a desktop application or a website application, right? So when I talk about platform coverage, okay, taking up one particular, we have multiple platforms, right? We did talk about Android, iOS, website, and okay, for example, whenever there is a new feature, right, which is coming in as a company-wide, platform-wide, for all the platforms, how do you do it? Or you might have a team of people, you might divide your task and subdivide your task based on, the expertise of the people. So it becomes so very important that you discuss among yourselves, what platform a person is picking it up, how they are, manifesting, or how they are, planning or approaching their own testing. So that helps us in, covering platforms. Maybe I pick it up Android, few of my colleagues pick up, M-side desktop, and those sort of things. Again, user path is so very important, because since all these, applications, what we're talking about, e-commerce, are so huge, they are humongous, right? There would be, hundreds and thousands of cases where, user might perform, or user might, go from one place to another. And then when there is a major change or a regression happening, right, it becomes so very important that we, look at these things from, very wider perspective, right? We want to look into, what a user would do, and that's where, we come up with cases like positive case, negative cases, and edge cases. It's so very important, because a certain action of a user might result in break of system. I'll tell you this particular example, this I faced. So there was this text box where I was supposed to enter only numbers, right? But then when I opened the same text box on desktop in a mobile view, right, I tried using my keyboard. Generally, a user on a mobile website don't have a keyboard with up and down arrow, right? So what do you do in that particular case? That led for the system to break. It would accept negative values, and accepting a negative value in a text, in a number field, is something which is not a great sign, right? So these sort of things, they come up with user path, what all crazy things user would do. Though a lot of user don't do, they do very basic things. They interact with the system with intention of actually doing, or reaching to a point where they want to. But then there are few, some like us, we are called testers. We try to do a lot of different things. We want to get system down, so that when we test, we come up with good things where we make quality of the system far better. Like, that's what we think, and that's what people expect us to do. So that's where user path coverage is so very important. Now coming up to test coverage. So I'll tell you my personal example. When I said I work as exploratory tester, there is not a lot of documentation what we do, or what we feed on. The reason being, when I say a lot of documentation, sometimes writing high level test cases or test scenarios is important, and it should be done. But then writing each and every step, one after the other, like launching the URL, is something which we generally don't prefer to do. There are ways of testing. Exploratory testing is one of them. So when you write test coverage report, right, when you want to cover a wide variety of things on your application, that's where your test coverage comes in picture. Test coverage again is a way of telling your stakeholders, this is what we are planning to execute on the application, this is what we are planning to test, right? And this is the results we are expecting out of it, not in terms of bugs or issues or system breakage, but in terms of our coverage, whether we have covered all these things for the satisfaction of our own, whether this application would work once it's shipped. Maybe you might have few cases or few examples in your previous, experience that you want to execute now, or maybe an older version of the current system had something which is, which broke on a certain, specification, maybe a older OS version and a newer, browser version, or an old app version on a new, Android app or iOS app. We do get, APKs available where people tend to download a newest APK on a old OS version. So all those things does come under, I should say, test coverage or platform coverage as well. Now, cross-browser testing. When we, deal with desktop, right? There are a lot of browsers available. You have, even with the mobile app, right? You have UC browser for mobile. You have Huawei browser. You have Samsung browser. You have, Chrome. You have multiple versions of Chrome. And a lot of times, if you, you buy an Android phone which has a native browser of its own, older phone used to have it, right? So you want to check in those phones or in those, browsers, how does your, system behaves, because it's so very important. We have user bases. So this particular thing is, something which I've experienced in my work, right? When you have good time, right, to test, you tend to spend more time on, all these browsers, checking out the functionalities, the look and feel of it, the UI and UX, right? But when your timelines are very crammed up, you always go with the topmost browser. When I say topmost browser, I'm talking about the browser which has the highest number of user percentage visiting us, or maybe, exploring the mobile or, website of it, right? So that's where it becomes important, even for the mobile version, that you test on multiple browsers. I'll tell you this, my personal experience. I've worked on Chrome for a long time, or Firefox for a long time, right? But sometimes when you go to, Windows on a Windows device, when you go to IE 11 or Microsoft Edge 14, right, you see a lot of new JavaScript, components don't work over there, because their systems, their, the way the browser code has been written is something which is pretty old, and it does not support newer components. And a lot of times I had to go to these websites to check if this particular function, or, my particular component of JavaScript would work on that. And that's where your developers comes in picture. You talk to them, you get to know, what all they have used, and then they tell you, okay, this particular thing, doesn't work. How do you get to know? You see it on the browser, maybe, IE 11, that, this particular widget is broken. You don't see the screen. The content which was supposed to come one after the other is coming, horizontally, and all those things, they don't match up to the expectation of a tester is. So that's why browser coverage testing is also so very important. Now, coming on to the Oracle and heuristics, I hope, you understand what an heuristic is. So, or I should say one more thing. Heuristics are, they are understand. We do apply, a certain set of, our thought process to test certain application. Like, this is, I should say, this is not the exact definition of heuristic is, but then in a nutshell, when I want to say the summary of it, that's what I would say. Anything and every approach I apply, to test my application becomes my, heuristics. Now, coming on, so since we are testers, a lot of times people don't believe us, right? When we raise a bug, we all have faced this, right? So what happens then? You come up with tools. You check your, when you test, you in parallel check your logs. How do you check it? Maybe through charts or developer consoles and Bagasura. So I'll tell you about Bagasura as well a little more. And after I complete this particular part, we use browser extensions. I work on desktop a lot, so I personally use, link checker to check if all my links are working fine, whether they are 200 or, if they are giving any 400, 4xx or 5xx and all those things, right? If my, website has 1,000 links, what do? I can't go and check each of the link, right, by clicking on it. So I rely on an external entity, maybe a browser extension, or, we tend to take a lot of screenshots, videos while raising a bugs. So that's where your browser extension works. So now coming back to the Bagasura part of it, I have been using Bagasura for, very limited time in the last few days or few weeks, I should say. And I can say one thing, Bagasura is I should say, a complete, package for a tester. The reason being this: you can take a screenshot, you can write a bug report, you can actually raise it on Jira, and this particular tool will do everything. And it does help you in understanding, what is your coverage, what all test cases did you run, what all test cases need to be completed, what all part of the website did you visit, and all those things. So I've been using Bagasura for quite some time now. One more thing, when I talk about tools and coverage, how do I forget about product management or project management? You raise a bug, you raise your epics. Since we talk about agile methodology and other things as well, it's so very important that we do follow the basics of methodologies. Sometimes people say we are 100% agile. I haven't seen anyone who is 100% agile in their methodology. So we use a lot of product management tools like Jira, Google Sheet, and Git. You might be wondering, since I did not talk about automation at all, why I'm talking about Git. Or a lot of testers, or a lot of my experience is onto manual testing, right? I'll tell you, Git is important for all of us, is because that's where few of our bugs lie. So when a developer writes its code, they push it, right? And if you have understanding of code, if you can go through, or if you can sit with a developer, your own developer, and get a chance to go through the code, you can formulate a lot of your test cases based on that. So this helps, these things, I should say, these things help us in covering a better product over the complete flow of the product from starting to end. And the challenges, I'm not sure if any one of us did not go through, all of us would have gone through. And being testers, data and environment availability is something which we raise as many number of times as we do, in at least in the e-commerce domain, where things are moving very 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 fast. Finding a stable environment sometimes for testing become so very difficult. So these challenges do come up. Okay, what happens if we don't have a product requirement document, right? Or developer developed something and nobody has a clue what this needs to be done. That knowledge sharing with a testing team, what needs to be tested. At least, see, I'll tell you, whether we have documentation or not, tester would know what he should or she should be testing. Though formulation of test cases, test coverage is individual's choice, but then the knowledge of what needs to be testing has to come from somewhere. A lot of times we don't get that. Unclear requirements, or maybe no product requirement document, or design, or unplanned tasks. It's like the first example I gave you, in the testing, what we get, they come up to you, we want to deliver it by evening. What do? That's so very unplanned. You have something which was planned for you to test, right? So these sort of things do come up, and we deal with these sort of things. And it's important we take a holistic and a positive approach when we talk about all these things, because it's important. It takes us to a lot of credibility when we try to solve problems, rather than just coming up with problems and no solutions. So guys, I am pretty much done with my part. Here is where you can reach me out. you know Moolya, I've been with Moolya for a good time, so you can reach out to me, or you can reach out to team at Moolya. And in case you want to try Bagasura, you want to explore it, you can find Bagasura at bagasura.io. And I say thank you to all to spend a lot of your time listening to me. Feel free to ask any queries. I'll be happy to help.
Hey Shashank, thank you. Ruksar here. Thank you for your session. It was helpful. The last slide that you showed us, first one challenge was
Yeah.
environmentally. So I would like to share my experience. Actually, I have tested on the application only on a single environment, where
Okay.
we were provided only the dev environment, and on the same environment we were testing. So it was quite challenging, and I would always recommend you guys never to agree on that part. It was very challenging. We had faced very ups and downs in the project due to that, and at the end, finally, it went live successfully. So that was a big challenge I have faced.
A lot of us do face this challenge where developer continuously develop things, and half
Yeah,
of the time your system does not work. How do you expect us to test? Because we do spend a lot of times working on flows, and something breaks in between. the complete rhythm is something which we have to get back again once the system is up and ready, right? So we
This
do
actually
face issues.
takes a lot of time
So
and rework as well.
yes,
That
it
was
does.
experience I
So I would like to add, this happened with me in the very initial stage of my career. And one more thing which I saw was this, so the complete build is not ready, but then the dev team says we will give you build in chunks. And that is the one of the pain points, because you have to rework it so much that
yeah, correct.
building it in one go would have been much more easier.
That's correct.
Sure. Thank you for raising that. Thank you for voicing your opinion on that.
Hi, Mr. Jain. My name is Rohit. I had a question.
Sure, Rohit.
See, actually, I also work for a startup, okay, and we are also into this mobile device. We build apps, okay. So the problem is our app has different types of users, with many of the vendors coming in like Vivo, Xiaomi, and everybody has, since Android is an open source platform, all the devices have different types of, features and given to them.
Yes.
So and it, as a startup, it is not feasible for a company to get all the devices and give to everybody and to do the testing. So sometimes we have options like AWS Farm and everything, but
Yes.
that also turns out to be quite expensive. And so AWS Farm also turns out to be a little expensive, right?